Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Jess. I upload videos a couple of times a week, mostly book related content with a little bit of travel and lifestyle thrown in for good measure. And for today's video I wanted to do my favourite historical fiction books revised. I did a video about 18 months ago called My Favourite Historical Fiction Books, and it is still one of my most searched for and discovered videos. It seems that lots and lots of people love a good old historical fiction book. But in the 18 months since I made that video, and actually I'll just quantify that those 6 books that I talked about were from my entire reading history. They weren't from the last year or anything like that. They were up to the 30-something that old that I was, my favourite historical fiction books. However, in the 18 months since I've made that video, I have read some absolutely stunning historical fiction books that would not only be considered some of my favourite historical fiction, but possibly some of my favourite books of all time. They are books that I talk about all the time. They are books that I lend out to people all the time. I recommend them to friends and family. I just love them, and so I thought that it was only fair that I added them on to this list, and I made a My Favourite Historical Fictions book part 2. Now there are not 6, there are only 4, just to keep things nice and tight, and also when I'm talking about historical fiction, it's a really difficult genre to quantify, but I think kind of the official agreed thing is that it's kind of any time period that is outside of the reader's frame of reference, and that's generally agreed to be about 50 years, and you'll see why I'm saying that shortly. So without further ado, let's jump in and start talking about my new favourite historical fiction books. So the first book I'm going to talk about is The Corset by Laura Purcell. This is a dark, gothic, Victorian story, and we are following 2 characters. We have Dorothea, who is young, she is beautiful, she is wealthy, and we have Ruth, who comes from a much poorer background and who is currently awaiting trial for murder. And the 2 women's paths cross when Dorothea visits the prison that Ruth is being held in. And Dorothea as a character is just very, very entertaining, and she balks against the expectations of her father and of society, and she has a slightly interesting pastime in that she is interested in the study of phrenology, which is basically the study of a person's skull and how that influences their characteristics. And so Dorothea visits the women's prison in the hope of befriending the prisoners and them allowing her to measure and study their skulls, and Ruth is one of the prisoners that Dorothea comes across. And so we're following Dorothea as she explores this phrenology, but also in her personal life. You know, she has pressures from her father to get married, and there's all kinds of things going on there. But then we also get to discover Ruth's story and what has brought her to the position that she currently finds herself in. This is just a really great book. Laura Purcell's writing is beautiful, it's very, very readable. The story doesn't end in the way that you think it would, and normally that would be a downer for me because I like things to kind of be concluded very nicely and neatly, but just something about the way that Laura Purcell writes means that I just didn't care. I just thought that it was absolutely fantastic, and I've since lent it out to countless people. It's a little bit dark, it's a little bit gruesome, but also there is quite a lot of humour sprinkled in. Dorothea in particular is just a very whimsical and interesting protagonist to follow, and I thoroughly enjoyed her story, and I almost wish that it had been a little bit longer so that we could have spent a little bit more time with both our female protagonists. But yes, definitely one that I enjoyed and definitely one that I would recommend. Next we have Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, and this is why I quantified that historical fiction is generally agreed to be anything that happens that has happened outside of the last 50 years, because this book is set in 2 timelines, and one of those timelines is in the 1960s. Now people like my parents, for example, will remember the 1960s and so would say that's not historical fiction, but for me it's totally out of my frame of reference, so it classifies as historical fiction. And then we also do have a timeline that goes slightly further back as well. So this, I'm sorry if you disagree, but this is firmly sitting in the historical fiction category for me. So this is set in Carolina, in the marshlands of Carolina, and we are following, as I said, 2 different storylines, but predominantly we are following a marsh girl called Kia. And Kia is part of a family that are on the edges of society, and she is very much looked down upon. She is uneducated, she is poor, she's not well-to-do or part of the mainstream of society. And the local people have always been a little bit wary of her. And so in 1969, when the body of a young man, the town's sweetheart, is found dead, and it seems as though Kaya is somehow involved, things begin to unfold, and we're following the past. We discover Kaya from being a very young girl, we discover her story all the way through to the present day, and then we're also following a more present day timeline where they're trying to discover what has happened, how has this person died, what has gone on. I know that there are mixed feelings about this book, and I would say that I struggled when I was reading it. I did actually do a reading vlog, which I'll link up here and in the description box down below if you want to go and watch. I did struggle with it because not that much happens. Although I am predominantly character driven, I do like a little bit of plot, and you just kind of meander your way through this story. But at some point, if you stick with it, at some point, and it certainly happened for me, I found the characters had just gotten under my skin to the point where I just wanted to almost go on this journey and walk alongside them and see how everything turned out. And when I finished the book, I had to sit in quiet for a minute and just think, wow, okay. And the feelings that it elicited in me were so unexpected versus my reading experience, but the story and the characters just totally got under my skin, and honestly just sat back and thought, wow, what an incredible way of writing a book that you don't even necessarily realize how much of an impact it's having until you finished it. And then you're like, oh, okay, like emerging into the light after reading and just thinking, what am I going to do now? Like, how am I going to process everything that I've read? And it is just such a beautiful story. And one of the things that I like, again, similar to the Corset, is the ending, and it's not what you expect, and it does make you feel a little bit like, huh, I don't know how I feel about that. Especially as someone whose moral code is incredibly strong. Yeah, it's interesting to think, I don't know how I feel about that actually, and it just gives you that last kind of sweet spot to just think about everything that has gone before. And it's just, I cannot recommend it enough. It's so original, it's so clever, it's so beautiful. Honestly think that it's worth sticking with, even if as you're reading it you're kind of thinking, I'm not sure, because the impact that it ultimately has is just fantastic. Highly recommend it, thought it was fantastic. Then a book which will probably be absolutely no surprise to anyone who has watched basically any other video, because I'm pretty sure that I talk about it all the time. I am of course going to reference Cersei by McGlynn, and I don't have a physical copy of this book because I lent it to someone in my job that I left in March, and I never got it back, and I do need to buy a copy of it because Cersei is without a doubt one of my all-time favourite books. I don't know whether it was the time that I read it in, I don't know if it was how I was feeling as I was reading it, I don't know if it's just a stunning book all on its own, I don't know, but there is something about this book that got its hooks in me. I flew through it, I did not want it to end, I was utterly bereft when I finished it, and I thought, I can't read this anymore. McGlynn Miller's writing is just so on point. I do feel like there are certain authors whose writing style you just absolutely click and connect with. Leigh Bardugo is one, and I think McGlynn Miller is another for me, and it just doesn't matter what they're writing, you just kind of get totally absorbed and swept up and carried along by it, and that is definitely how I would describe my reading experience with Cersei. So Cersei is a Greek mythological retelling following the story of Cersei, and her story is moving and sad and haunting. It doesn't go easy for her, but you do also find yourself getting a little bit frustrated by some of the choices that she makes, and you kind of think, if you just get yourself together, it probably would be better for you. So she's not a perfect character by any stretch, and there are just various different things that happen and go on, and you're following her as she has been cast out and is forced to live on an island because of something that she does, and various different well-known characters from Greek history cross Cersei's path, and it pulls from all different places, and I just really don't want to say any more than that because I think that this book is best going into blind. But just, yeah, something about Cersei's character I just connected with and loved. My heart broke for her, I laughed with her, I cried with her, just thought it was fantastic. cannot gush about this book enough. I would highly recommend it. And I did also, after reading Cersei, read A Song of Achilles, which again I also enjoyed, not as much as this one, but I loved Madeline Miller's writing style. She's definitely an author by author for me, and thought that it was brilliant. And the final book I'm going to talk about probably again is no surprise, because when I read it this year I just fell in love and gushed and gushed and gushed about it, and that is A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. So this is set in Russia in the 1920s, and we are following the story of Count Alexander Rostov. And because Rostov is one of the old nobility and the new government is kind of coming into play in Russia, he is confined to house arrest in the Hotel Metropole. So he goes to a trial, and they basically say to him, you have to immediately go to this hotel, stay there, you can never leave. And there is just something about this book, and again I think it's the characters, because Count Rostov is just such a whimsical, funny and just lovable character. And I think I said this when I did my wrap up, that he's the kind of character that I would just love to sit and have a drink with and have a chat, because I just think that it would be absolutely fantastic. It's very character driven, because obviously Count Rostov's life is confined to the walls of the hotel, so you meet various different characters, people who work in the hotel and people who just visit. There are a couple of twists and turns, and it spans quite a significant number of years, with Rostov just looking at the world passing by outside his window, and then experiencing life inside the hotel. And you'd think on the surface that would actually be quite boring, but Amor Towles' writing is just absolutely stunning. It's so glorious, it's so good to read. It's just, Rostov himself is just such a charming character, and I defy you to not fall in love with Rostov, to not want to follow his story, to not laugh out loud and then feel heartbreak over some of the things that go on, because of course the political situation in Russia rapidly alters and changes during the period that Rostov is confined to the hotel, and you get to experience all of that through his story. Just highly recommend it. Beautifully written, very amusing in places, lovable characters. There is just so much humour and humanity, and yeah, I would just highly recommend it. So there you go, they are the 4 books that I would add to my favourite historical fiction. Thank you very much for watching. Do leave me a comment, let me know what your favourite historical fiction books are. I would always love to know. If you enjoyed this video, please give me the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. As always, thank you very much for watching, take care, and I'll see you all soon.